a few things that needs to happen for that scenario to materialize. One is that today, most applications are best effort kind. So they can reside in a central cloud, and they are not optimized together with the network. What we see now with applications that have very demanding requirements on the network is that that is not a long-term sustainable situation. The clouds need to get closer to the networks. And that can happen in two ways. Either by, as you suggested, moving some of the central clouds onto this infrastructure, which is a business agreement and can be done. The other way is to find ways to federate or to coexist. So you could imagine that an external cloud here gets access to this machinery so that the SLA that ultimately decides what do you want that cloud for also includes the network. So you're saying that I want to have this and this amount of applications running, and by the way, they run for 10,000 of my employees and they are using these applications from Salesforce or whatever, and they have to have certain characteristics on the network, otherwise it doesn't work. So you can think of coexistence where you federate between external and networks, external clouds and networks. So the technology is flexible enough to do it. It's more a business agreement or a business modeling issue.
Yeah, just a question on the shift. I mean, essentially you're talking about a shift from managing complexity to sort of abstracting complexity.
Anyway, yes.
What happens to the OSS environment, and what's being done to ensure that operators who have an existing BSS OSS environment can migrate into this?
Excellent question. So this picture is a little bit too simplified for technical people who try to build network architectures, because within this control layer, management layer, and within this orchestration layer, there are a number of subparts. One of which is a classical OSS BSS. Because as I said, you don't swap out the complete network, you do it domain by domain. So you interface between existing OSS BSS and these new domains. And in our case, that's very easily doable. This is something that we, because of our strong position in the OSS and BSS space, we're doing as part of our network evolution, network migration. But it's also so that some of these pieces, the orchestration and some of the cloud management, they haven't been there before. So in our case, we're also launching new products. We talked about it back in Barcelona. For example, the Ericsson Cloud Manager that takes care of these virtualized resources. Okay.
You mentioned Ericsson's strong position in BSS OSS. Can you go into a little more detail about where that expertise was derived, whether it be through acquisitions or you wake up and how'd you become an expert in that area, and then how do you leverage that across the network?
Good point, fair point. So, first of all, as part of any network, and we have a substantial network presence around the world, the OSS systems are there as part of installing the network. That gives us a very good base when it comes to managing these networks. All the mobility and all of that is part of the OSS that we ship every day. In addition to that, we have the Telcordia acquisition, which is relatively recent, which is both sort of an OSS part broader than our previous portfolio. So we have broadened our scope when it comes to OSS. And we've also made acquisitions in the charging area in the BSS space earlier, actually. And that has complemented what we do with previous only Ericsson products on real-time charging.
Yeah, which acquisition was that on the real-time charging?
So the real-time charging was actually more of an in-house development. The acquisition I was referring to was LHS.
Yes. Can I just make a comment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have
experts in the room here. Yeah. So I work on the system integration side on an OSS BSS. I just want to add as well that we've also done some acquisitions on the capability side as well. I mean, the Pride acquisition in Italy, for example, adds 1,000 people that are working with all the business processes as well. In addition to that, the Telcocell acquisition that we're doing now in Canada, for example, is an excellent example of the managed IT-oriented services that operators need around BSS as well. We also have one in Thailand as well on OSS side. So it's a combination of making sure we have good products, but also the capabilities.
Absolutely. Thanks.
I'll be here tomorrow.
I remember Telcordia more was an SS7 signaling type group. What were some of the other key assets underneath Telcordia that position you for the mobile cloud virtualization?
So as I said, when it comes to OSS and mobility is an area that we have covered since long. This is something that comes with the network when you roll them out. So we have a very strong position when it comes to OSS for mobility. With the Telcordia acquisition, we strengthened that also for markets where we're not present and also on the fixed side. So it's more of a complete converged portfolio for OSS. Now, some of the things that I mentioned in terms of cloud management, that's also new development with these resources that we have. So this is not just pre-existing products, this is really new development. Okay?
Yeah. What about security? When you put more third-party apps into the network, isn't there a danger that people start slipping on packets or introduce errors when they suddenly happen to emit quite a lot of packets and things like that?
Well, I think security in general is the foundation for all of these network architectures. There is no way that we could transform without a solid security architecture, both in terms of all the nodes as well as how the complete network handles secure connections. But when we talk about openness to other applications and services, it is initially not a marketplace where applications just show up. Typically, operators would like to have significant screening and testing and validation and in many cases also some level of certification on the core apps. So I think that is well recognized as something that needs to be in there from day one. But what it also gives as an opportunity is that some of the ideas that may be unique to one operator or that come out of one market can more easily be put into the network. And the core infrastructure would be more global in nature. It could serve more regions, more customers, more markets with an offering that is a base offering. So that's one other reason why those third-party interfaces are absolutely needed. Yes?
How will the efforts by telco people and efforts by data center people come together in the future? I mean, there's currently clearly let's say separation or difference in terms of how to approach SDN and particularly NFV.
Yeah.
So how does that going to be integrated?
I think it's a very, very valid point. Actually, as was I think shown also earlier today, there is the obvious convergence of networks from communication to IT, but you could also add the media piece, because in many cases the media piece has been a separate infrastructure, a separate industry that is now coming onto the same industry here. So we have those three industries actually converging. And in terms of what we are borrowing, what the networks are borrowing from the traditional data center, which are now cloudified on an IP base, is the layering, it's the abstraction, it is the way to provide service innovation on top. But at the same time, there is a big difference between a network and a server. So you treat redundancy, you treat stability and robustness very different in a network versus a data center. And this is something that you need to bring with you when we are virtualizing the network. So therefore, the technologies that are for the network piece, they will have to be significantly different from classical IT technology. And if you're asking who will provide what piece here in the future, then I think that it's probably going to be a mix, because you need both sides. It is not possible to build these networks with standard IT infrastructure, nor would you build a full-scale central data center, a cloud, with networking technology. That doesn't make sense. So there is a blend here, and that blend will reuse from both worlds, and that's a true convergence.
You talked about OpenStack and OpenFlow and OpenDLA.
Yes.
What are the sort of concrete example of your work with those people?
Yeah, so maybe for everyone's benefit here, OpenStack is probably the world's fastest growing open source community in terms of contributors, lines of code, and commitment. And you could think of it as the Linux of the cloud world. It is the foundation to build clouds with an open source code base. And so Ericsson is a member of OpenStack. We are also taking part in the board, so we are part of driving OpenStack. OpenStack in itself has a number of contributors already, so we also work via partners with smaller and bigger companies that are already providing very much of the components that OpenStack includes. In our own situation, we have already taken the decision that the virtualization and the cloud that we will build, our infrastructure, is based on OpenStack. And that is because we believe in openness. We believe that this has to be provided in an open fashion to the industry. We cannot have vendor lock-in. At the same time, we are, of course, seeing the need to modify the classical OpenStack for data centers into OpenStack for networks. So there is significant work that we are contributing in that area. Open Daylight is another open source forum where we are a founding member, where we can actually have industry come together and build open source component for the SDN controller piece. And the SDN controller is then, as I said earlier, the control piece or the brain piece of a typical router or a node that is directing traffic. Also in that space, it makes sense to pool resources. Open Daylight does not have the same momentum yet as OpenStack. But it's a growing community, and we are very significantly contributing there as well.
Do you have any idea to use that Open Daylight controllers APIs to that application for particular industries and use cases for service provider?
Yes. So there is a link here between the cloud part, the OpenStack part, and the SDN part, the Open Daylight part. And that is simply that when we are ordering resources, when the cloud system orders network resources, it does it via this SDN controller. So there's a very clear link there between the two. The industry has not yet aligned on how this should be done, so you are asking a question that is, as we speak, being defined. But we are very much bringing these two worlds together so that the cloud can actually control the SDN infrastructure. Yes? There was another question.
All this discussion is extremely interesting. In this context, there's something like, you could say, like a value line. Like, Facebook, for example, they make data centers essentially open source because they say that's not where their value is, whereas Google or other companies keep their data centers kind of proprietary. So where is this limit for Ericsson? Do you know what I mean? Where do you see the kind of things which you keep secret because that's your crown jewels, and what do you take open source in the community?
So I realize Ericsson may not be known to the full extent, but we are well known in the communications industry to provide open solutions. We have been the company in the world, probably the company that longest has driven open solutions. In some cases standardized solutions, in other cases open source solutions, simply because we believe in scale solutions. We would like to be providers of solutions that can work across the world. So from that point of view, we take components, we take standards and open source contributions and make solutions out of them. That doesn't mean that everything, of course, is open source or everything is standards. There is a significant part of Ericsson's unique development in everything that we do. And we build networks. We build the mobility piece, we build the IP piece, and we build the telco data center piece. We do not build the data centers that Facebook are using. We do not build the central data centers or clouds outside of the operating space. Nor do we build the applications that Google or Facebook would put on top of the network. But we make sure that we can enable them to reach into the networks and get the user experience that they want. So from that point of view, there is full openness towards interacting between the applications and the network, and there is full openness in terms of using components and using standards whenever that serves the industry's purpose. We believe in scale. So it may sound like a puzzle that is difficult to put together, but it actually makes pretty good sense when you start to look at pooling resources in the industry, when you start to see that we need industry momentum. We can't have proprietary solutions for every industry vertical. We need to have global solutions. Otherwise, many of these use cases that you heard about today, they will not come to fruition. It's not possible to have unique networks for each industry. We have to have a common base. Okay?
Where does 3GPP, IEEE, TM Forum, traditional standard bodies fit in Open Daylight or these open network forums?
So far, you could say that they're not aligned in the sense that they're not working with the same base architecture. And the reason for that is that if you take 3GPP or IETF with their protocol standards as an example, they come out of the full interoperability paradigm, which means that boxes interface and networks interface and providers interface. This type of network architecture comes from a separation of layers for flexibility and speed of innovation and reuse. So over time, we will use both, and we will use them where it makes most sense. So for example, 3GPP is the competent body to drive anything that has to do with radio and mobility. There is nothing else. When you go into a data center, it's very clear that this is a model that is the right one and is gaining ground across the industry. It will be, if you like, a fusion of the two. Okay, anything else on those questions?
I've got one question just on a company basis. Give us some indication of company organization and scale. Bearing in mind your recent acquisitions, where is this work on SDNs taking place? Is it spread out or has it become centralized?
Well, Ericsson is present in almost all countries of the world, as you know, and we have R&D across the world for good reasons. We want to have a balanced approach to R&D. But it's no secret that when we started this SDN work, we did it out of our collaboration with Stanford, we did it out of Silicon Valley, and we also have our headquarters for the IP and broadband business in Silicon Valley. So it's product-led from US, from Silicon Valley, but it has resources across the world. And that is because some of these things, as I said, they tie into network nodes that will have to remain as they are for a very long time. So it's a matter of working both with the existing as well as new. Then when it comes to the things that we're doing with the Ericsson Cloud system, which we'll hear more about tomorrow, and which is the way we virtualize all the applications onto a common environment, that is headquartered out of Stockholm. Again, with resources across, including North America, including Asia to get